Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It's me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia, and it's time to look ahead to the waiver wire for round one of the playoffs. It's week 15, and to help us find the names you need to stream on your way to fantasy glory, Pat Fitzmaurice, my patty cakes, and DBro Derek Brown, the king of bros. Gentlemen, nothing can break my stride today. As a Mets fan, Juan Soto is officially in the blue and orange, so I mean, I'm in such a good mood. Not even Derek Brown can bring me down. That's what I'm saying today. And I'm excited. I've got some playoff teams. I'm sure you guys do too. I've got some teams that are still on the bubble. We'll see what happens on Monday night. Fingers crossed. I know a lot of you are still kind of sweating out some leagues. But Pat, you know, we're in this spot here. And if you had been listening to the show the last couple of weeks, we made the stuffing and cuffing jokes. Ha, 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 funny, funny, funny. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, for those teams that did that successfully, Sunday was the perfect storm of crap in which it turned out to be the best thing you could do. Zach Charbonnet ended up having to play, right? Because Ken Walker was out. Braylon Allen ended up having to play because Breece Hall was out. So this whole concept of, you know, you don't have to draft the backups, but you certainly do at some point have to stash the backups once we turn the page into November. And I feel like we did our audience a pretty good service. Pat, how are you feeling now that we're on the 9th of December in the playoff hunt here for a championship, that people actually probably did listen and hopefully had those insurance policies on lockdown?
Yeah, I do hope the Kenneth Walker investors were clever enough to take Zach Charbonnet, because that was the time, and a big cash in for those people. The people who, and this one you needed to be nimble on, Joe, the Isaac Guerendo, because all that went down last Monday, where not only is Christian McCaffrey out for the season, but Jordan Mason too. And I know Guerendo was widely available there. So sometimes there's something to be said for keeping your powder dry in a year like this, when there was not a lot on waivers all year, and certainly not a lot at the running back position. So the people who were left with 80% of their fab because they found nothing to spend it on and could go out and get Isaac Guerendo were probably pretty handsomely rewarded. Although, well, guess what? Isaac Guerendo might be no more after yesterday.
Oh boy. San Francisco goes through running backs the way Steve Cohen, my owner of the Mets, goes through money. But it's okay. I'm okay with it. I'm going to make
Joe, it must be nice to cheer for a team that spends money. As a Milwaukee Brewers fan,
yeah, well, I mean, as a Mets fan, we haven't always spent it right or spent it at all. So this is a whole new dynamic for me. I'm still, you know, trying to figure out the landscape.
All this Mets love and not one bit of Mets garb on you right now. I'm kind of.
Oh no, I already did the video.
I know.
I was literally wearing everything. This is the.
I was expecting some remnants.
No. I understand the football show. People are yelling at me already to get back to football, and I will. So, Derek Brown. The other thing I want to talk about before we launch into the waivers is this. Mm-hmm. Every year, there's some shiny toy on the waiver wire in round one of the playoffs. It's a good matchup. Maybe had a good week. And people start overthinking things in terms of not just picking them up, but do I want to start this guy in week 15? Like, do I want to go with the horses that brought me there? And I feel like more often than not, that ends up being a bad decision. It's one thing to roster them so somebody else can't use them against you. But then some of these players, it's not just about getting them on your roster to play. It's more getting them on your roster sometimes so other people can't, and the gamesmanship there. So how important is that discipline to really have a strong evaluation of, look, these are the players that I drafted. These are the players that I've been working with. These are the players that got me to the playoffs, and not taking them out of your lineup for somebody you just picked up necessarily.
No, it's huge, man. I mean, you got to look at production. You got to look at who got you there and stuff. Like, I mean, like, and we've seen this, like, on the live streams, Joe, like what the last few weeks, we've seen Jane Daniels questions. We've seen Josh Allen questions. We haven't even talked about his monster day. Like,
a lot of points.
There have been questions about a lot of players where we're like, do I play Cooper Kupp? I mean, he had a bad game and stuff. It's like, look, we can get a little bit too much into it and get too cute with some of this stuff sometimes, where it's like, okay, just play the players that are good at the thing called football.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good advice right there. All right, so we're going to go through every position today. We're going to do things a little differently. We're going to go through our favorite streamers of the week, because hopefully in your league, no one else can pick anyone else up. There's no reason for a team that's not in the playoffs to want to pick somebody up. If your league is structured that way, you need to get on the horn to your commissioner and fix that right away. So we're going to start at the running back position. And Pat, I want to start with you here. Give me a running back that you feel good about streaming this week off the waiver wire should he still be out there in your league?
I don't know if there's anyone I feel great about streaming this week, Joe, but I feel okay about Tank Bigsby this week. He outsnapped Travis Etienne 31-28 yesterday and outcarried him 18-4. Finished with 18 carries for 55 yards and a touchdown against a really good Tennessee run defense. Career high in carries for Tank. But he's been really good as a runner this year. And I believe going into week 14, I want to say that he was leading all runners with at least 40 rushing attempts in yards after contact per carry. Like, he's just been a better runner than Travis Etienne has been this year. And with Mac Jones at quarterback, you need to lean on the running game. So, neutral matchup coming up this week against the Jets. And then if you can make it that far with Tank, pretty good matchup against Las Vegas coming up in week 16.
Yeah. Speaking of Las Vegas, let's talk about a running back that we actually mentioned last week as maybe a guy to stash, especially with Bipocalypse going around, was Sincere McCormick of the Raiders. And the backfield didn't get much healthier. And McCormick looks like a guy right now, DBro, that you could feel pretty good about having on your roster for depth, not just for week 15, but maybe rest of season.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be in that fringe RB2 conversation after what we saw last week. And we talked about him on the live stream constantly. We talked about him on the Waiver Wire podcast last week, and he's my top streaming guy of the week. And looking at his matchups, I mean, you could stream him the next 3 weeks. If you pick him up, he's only 15% roster right now. Like, he gets Atlanta, Jacksonville, and New Orleans. Good rushing matchups. And we saw he took over the backfield. 61% of the snaps. He almost had 20 touches, 89 total yards. I understand that this offense is a little bit more gross now that, again, we're down another quarterback for Las Vegas. But Sincere looks like, I mean, he's breaking tackles. He's getting all the work. I mean, the volume he's seeing is RB2 level worthy.
Yeah. Pat, real quick, I want to get your take on McCormick too, because this is a player, you saw in college have some success. Are you surprised at what you've seen out of him in the NFL so far in this small sample that you've gotten so far with the Raiders?
Not terribly. He was a fun watch at the University of Texas, San Antonio. So not totally. And, you figure at this point, Joe, the Raiders just have to roll with him, right? I mean, yards per carry is a bad stat, but Alexander Madison is averaging 3.3 yards per carry this year. So far, small sample size, but Sincere McCormick is averaging 5.5 yards per carry. And this team is going nowhere. Like, he deserves an extended audition down the stretch.
Yeah, we'll see what the health of the quarterback situation in Las Vegas yields. But Tank Bigsby, Sincere McCormick, two guys that might still be floating around there. Again, this is the tricky thing, too, after week 14. And another reason why, guys, I got to tell you, from a fantasy football perspective, I hate week 14 being the heavy bye week. I really do. I don't know why we don't do it in 10 and 12 and then have this push towards the end for everybody, because what you see is the way things are structured now with the extended week 18, you have this weird compression in the market where 6 teams are on a bye week 14. All these teams go all in on all these free agents. And then guess what? Most of those teams aren't relevant anymore. And now those guys that might have been useful on the waiver wire for other people, now they're not there anymore. And that's kind of frustrating when you look at the way the league has structured the schedule from a fantasy perspective. Again, there's nothing we can do about it. It's just the way it is. But week 14 being such a strong bye week, it always feels like nowadays, the last 2 years at least, that you kind of have to make sure you have your ducks in a row before you even get anywhere close to 14, and then you end up basically playing with what you have. One thing you can do with the money you have is go over to DraftKings and make some more of it, because the NBA season is rolling along. Playing Pick 6 from DraftKings, an official sports betting partner of the NBA, is a way to get even more into the action with your favorite players. It's a super simple way to get started. You first download the DraftKings Pick 6 app, then select 2 or more players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat. It's pretty easy, like points, rebounds, 3-pointers, you name it, they've got it. You track your picks for a shot at huge cash prizes, and that's not it. You can even do the Pick 6 available in most states, including California, Texas, Georgia, Missouri, and more. So if you haven't done this already, now is the time. And for all the first-time Pick 6 players, check this out. New customers pay $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits. So the fun of the NBA season continues with the most fun way to play fantasy sports. Pick 6 from DraftKings. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now. Use that promo code FantasyPros. That's one word, FantasyPros. And again, new customers get $5 to play in there. All you got to do is put your 5 in there. You get 50 out in Pick 6 credits only on DraftKings. Pick 6, the crown is yours. let's move over to the wide receivers. DBro, why don't you start us off with somebody that you feel good about picking up and somebody that you are confident in maybe perhaps the rest of season being somebody that could be useful for fantasy championship run.
Yeah, and I know he had a down week last week, but I'm telling people the bounce back is coming in the next 2 weeks, and that's Elijah Moore. Entering the game against the Steelers, Elijah Moore, we've seen the big games with Jameis Winston under center. He had a 21.5% target share, 23% first read share. I know the down game against Pittsburgh, and people are like, should go back to the well. But you have the Kansas City Chiefs and the Cincinnati Bengals upcoming. Neither one of those pass defenses can stop slot wide receivers. So Elijah Moore going back to the well this week.
All right. So Elijah Moore, certainly with Tillman having some concussion issues too. That's another one too, where, less guys around. Who knows if he gets cleared again? We'll see how the season rolls on. Fitzy, let's talk about a wide receiver you feel good about picking up off the waiver wire for week 15.
I don't know how good I feel about it, Joe, but Quentin Johnston certainly has some boom potential this week, especially if Ladd McConkey continues to be out for the Chargers. Really good matchup against the Buccaneers, who've given up the 4th most receptions and 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And Johnston just had a pretty good game against a Chiefs defense that has just been really tough on outside receivers. 5 catches, 48 yards, and a touchdown, and actually made some tough catches. Hung on to one where he absolutely got crushed by, I want to say, Nick Bolton. So a nice bounce back game for Quentin Johnston after a pair of duds. And he is, if Ladd continues to be out, the lead receiver for Justin Herbert, one of the best passers in the league.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, that a bit of a grind last night, that game. I remember when the Chiefs games used to be fun to watch. Remember that, guys? Remember when Chiefs games were fun?
Entertaining. So long ago.
Yeah, do we do we let Matt Nagy get by too easily? Because that's the one thing we can all look at too. Ever since the offensive coordinator changed to Matt Nagy a couple years ago, I understand he doesn't have Tyreek Hill, and I get that, but there was a year without Tyreek Hill that things were still pretty good and a little bit more dynamic. I know Travis Kelce's gotten older. DBro, what do you think about that? Like, do you think maybe we don't hang enough of maybe some of the play calling being a little lackluster in the OC and Matt Nagy, a guy that failed miserably with the Bears, who's come back into town and taken over that job a couple years ago, that ever since the Chiefs offense has been a little meh?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely got to be part of it, man. I mean, I just don't know if Kansas City cares about, making it look pretty anymore. They're just like, nah, we just care about winning. However we do it, it's all good. Fun. Deep passing, we don't even know if Mahomes can do that anymore. It doesn't really matter. We're not especially efficient running the ball. It doesn't really matter. Defense has some holes. Doesn't really matter. We just continue to win.
Pat, let's say we live in a world where Travis Kelce comes back again next year and we get Rashee Rice healthy, and maybe Hopkins decides he wants to play one more year because, it's the Chiefs and he wants to come back and they want him back and they roll all in. Will this year sort of taint your image of the Chiefs offense from a fantasy perspective in 2025, or would you give them a fresh look with fresh health next season?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Joe, because now we've seen more than a full calendar year of Patrick Mahomes being a pretty average fantasy quarterback, which is really kind of strange. And it's obviously not the talent level with Mahomes. It's more about the way that the Chiefs play. And so that's going to be a hard assessment. What does happen if we see him with all this weaponry around him, with Kelce, the healthy Rashee Rice, with maybe Hopkins back? Xavier Worthy another year ingrained in the offense. So it is an interesting question. I still have not fully wrapped my head around the fantasy decline of Patrick Mahomes.
I was very bullish on Mahomes this year, and I have to take a huge L on that because I thought he would get back into those, fantasy stratosphere. We've seen so many good years from him. I thought last year was just one of those weird anomaly, sometimes this happens, changing of the guard, all that talent moving in and out, and then things started to get better towards the end of the season. And then this year is more of the same. Like you said, just disappointing, underwhelming Patrick Mahomes, and that's not something we were used to throughout his entire career. The quarterbacks to stream this week, perhaps in your worst situations for quarterbacks in single quarterback leagues, or maybe the quarterbacks you're trying to decide between in your Superflex leagues. Fitzy, there was an old quarterback yesterday that actually put up some good yardage totals, but unfortunately, the Jets always find a way to lose, which I don't know if I'm torn because I want them to stop losing at a certain point. so I can get a better draft pick as a Patriots fan. And then at the same time, I don't want them to stop losing because I'm a Patriots fan. It's really hard. Like, I'm really torn about these things. I mean, these are the things that keep me up at night. Pat, Aaron Rodgers, how do you feel about his matchup this week? And how do you feel about rolling him out there in a fantasy lineup if you have to?
Surprisingly good, Joe. And I know a couple of weeks ago there were people thinking that maybe Rodgers would check himself out in these meaningless games down the stretch with some self-diagnosed injury. Hasn't happened. Just had his first 300-yard passing game of the season. Has the dynamic duo of Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson to throw to, and gets a really attractive Week 15 matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who everyone except Will Levis throws successfully against.
So here's a question for you too. Did the Breece Hall injury exacerbate the need, in your opinion, to put the ball in Rodgers' hands more and be a little bit looser, perhaps, with some of the play calls?
Yeah, apparently. I mean, it wasn't like they were doing a lot of business on the ground anyway, really. Like they were not a ground and pound team, and they sort of, cobbled it together with Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, who Isaiah Davis, kind of another sneaky play this week, because the matchup against the Jags is pretty good for the runners too. But so both of those guys were used in the passing game also. So suddenly we've got Aaron Rodgers with a pretty full complement of weapons here. And maybe they're not going to lean on the running game as much as they might if Breece Hall were around. So it does seem like it's a strangely good setup for the Jets and Aaron Rodgers.
Davis almost had another touchdown too, but it was a ball that hit the ground in the end zone. That had to be that whole performance from Isaiah Davis history had to be just incredibly infuriating for anybody who was like really excited about starting Braylon Allen. That was a real
Braylon Allen played one more snap than Isaiah Davis.
10 for 43. Looking at the stats right now, 10 for 40, for Davis, 11 for 43 for Braylon Allen. But again, Davis had the touchdown and almost had two. Isaiah Davis had 3 catches for 27. Braylon Allen 4 for 38. So it really was just about a true split there. So Davis, maybe another guy in those deeper leagues if you're really hurting at RB. Maybe something to think about. Who knows? All right, let's get to another quarterback. Before we do, a quick reminder out there to a lot of the guys. Look, low testosterone affects about 30% of adult men in America, and it's okay to talk about this. And if you're feeling drag or fatigue, you're noticing a dip in muscle mass, you're trying to stay in shape, it's just not working out because you're getting older, or if you're sensing a slump in your libido, and if so, these are all signs of low testosterone. It's time to get your testosterone levels checked, okay? And if you have low T, Kyzatrex is an FDA-approved pill that's changing the game in testosterone replacement therapy. In fact, Kyzatrex restored testosterone levels in nearly 9 out of 10 clinical study participants, and its unique formulation bypasses the liver to avoid liver damage, which is very important. It's time to break free from injections, pellets, and gels. Use Kyzatrex and take a step towards being the hero of your life again. To see if you qualify, visit Kyzatrex.com and take the low T quiz today. That's Kyzatrex, Kyzatrex.com, and visit it today and find out if it can help you get back to being the best you that you can be. Let's get to a quarterback. Jameis Winston is always the best version of himself, DBro. I don't care what the stat line ever says. It's always Jameis Winston living his best life. So can he live his best life in Week 15? That, my friends, is the question.
Well, I don't know if the Lord's going to deliver him from pick sixes, but you want to talk about the fly in the ointment of how the Chiefs win? Jameis Winston is just walking in like, I'm ready for chaos, baby. Like, if there's a guy that could bring you, and I say you, the royal you?
The royal, well, usually it's the royal we. Pat, can we get a grammatical ruling on that? You're the guy.
There's no royal you? We can't use the royal you?
I don't know.
Can't make that up? No.
Yeah.
Well, Jameis is going to possibly bring an L for the Chiefs this week. If he goes and he throws for 400 yards and goes nuts and stuff like that, and that's going to help fantasy managers out there. And we've seen him be a QB1 in 50% of his starts. And heck, one of these weeks, guys, he was the QB1 overall. So, yeah, stream him, plug him in as your QB2 in your Superflex lineups. Probably a big Jameis weekend coming.
Yeah, certainly could be. That game is at 1 Eastern in Cleveland. The Jets are going to be at Jacksonville too. Just that reminder, that game is on the road. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe Aaron Rodgers needs to get out of New York more often. Maybe that's the secret sauce here for him. All right, let's move on here to the tight ends. DBro, we talked about Juwan Johnson last week. Juwan Johnson got some fantasy action last week. Again,
Yep.
sometimes it's just as easy as addition by subtraction. But speaking of subtraction, Derek Carr injury. Oh, God. The Saints have had
Crazy.
the worst injury luck I have seen in a team in a very long time. And that's saying something because it feels like every week somebody's hurt in the NFL. So is Juwan Johnson still a tight end worthy where we are right now in the stratosphere of the New Orleans Saints roster of what's remaining left with them?
He is. And I understand, okay, quarterback concerns. I mean, this just comes down to they have nobody else left outside of him and MVS to throw the freaking ball to. So because of that, over the last 2 games, Juwan Johnson has had a 17.6% target share. He has good matchups upcoming. He's averaged 43 receiving yards over those 2 games. You throw a touchdown like last week on top of any of those stat lines, and he's going to be a tight end 1 weekly. So, yeah, Juwan Johnson's got good matchups. I love streaming him this week.
Okay, Pat, a streaming tight end this week, a guy that's coming off a bye that has really, had a pretty, I would say, under the radar season from a tight end landscape, and one that I think maybe is underappreciated. It's a guy from New England. Let's talk about Hunter Henry.
Yeah, I mean, I'll do respect to Mr. Derek Brown, but I just I don't want to have to depend on Jake Haener or Spencer Rattler in my week 15 matchup. So I am willing to depend on Drake May, though.
Yes.
As good as he's been,
Yes.
and May has leaned heavily on Hunter Henry, who is averaging in Drake May's 8 starts 5.3 catches and 53.8 receiving yards a game. He's only scored 1 touchdown. I'm surprised he hasn't had more in the May starts, but he's averaging basically double-digit PPR points for you, and pretty good numbers for a tight end. So I'm willing to ride with him. I just think the floor is probably safer than you get with any other widely available tight end.
I would agree. I think Hunter Henry, has certainly proven that he can be a useful fantasy tight end, maybe a lower end fantasy tight end, but I mean, that's kind of been tight end for the most part, unless you had Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers has been the truth. Outside of that, man, that guy's fun to watch. Imagine if he had a real quarterback. Imagine what Brock Bowers would be with a Patrick Mahomes, but we're not going to see that, unfortunately. All right, let's get to the defenses. And this is not to be overlooked. I think this is very important when you're trying to scratch and claw your way to points. Some teams out there, a lot of managers have been streaming defenses all year. So this is really where the rubber meets the road. This is a spot where I think some teams sometimes overlook where they can get points from, and that defense spot is one of them. So, Pat, when you comb through the waiver wire, what defense stands out to you as somebody in week 15 that you feel good about the matchup, good about the points they might be able to create? Because every single point matters to advance to round 2 of the playoffs.
Well, I like the Green Bay Packers, Joe, because they have a pretty good 2-week stretch coming up here. The Packers haven't been forcing turnovers quite like they were earlier in the season, but they have a week 15 matchup against the Seahawks. They've given up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing defenses, and who have a pretty bad offensive line that I think the Packers pass rush might be able to exploit. And then in week 16, they get the New Orleans Saints, the Derek Carr-less New Orleans Saints. So pretty good 2-week run out here for the Packers. If you're down to the felt on fab money, pick up the Packers, and then you will not have to spend on a defense again in week 16.
All right. Let's get to a defense from your perspective here, Derek. Who do you think might be intriguing? Maybe just not for 15, but maybe rest of the playoffs as well.
Yeah, this comes down to, and there was 2 teams for this week that kind of I bounced back and forth with. One being the Atlanta Falcons going up against Desmond Ridder.
I know, because you just changed it in the show.
I just did.
I saw who you were going to talk about, and then you changed it right underneath my nose. Do you think I was going to notice?
No,
I did. That one by the goalie.
I did. Look, any defense going against Desmond Ridder, and I understand how bad the Falcons looked. They have to be somewhere near the top of the list, but man, it's the Washington Commanders. And I just talked about Juwan Johnson. They could still throw the ball. He could still have a decent day, but depending on who the quarterback is, we're going to maybe see sacks. We're going to maybe see turnovers, and the Washington Commanders defense is readily available. They're out there everywhere, and they've been playing better. And hey, guess what? What do we see? Maybe a pick 6, Marshawn Lattimore revenge game. Maybe he's active this week. I don't know, boys.
Revenge for what? Being traded to a contender and getting the hell out of New Orleans? If anything, he should be sending them an edible
A
arrangement.
little bit of venom still left over from Dennis Allen time. We'll call it.
Oh, Dennis Allen's gone. The Riz is there now, yelling at punters.
And clogging toilets, apparently.
Hey, man, look, you get that big Chipotle burrito, things are going to happen.
Oh,
let's get to the kickers for the week here. DBro, streaming kicker, week 15. Who do you have?
We're going to go Chad Ryland against the Patriots. He's put up double-digit points in 3 of his last 6 games, so riding with him.
Fitzy, a kicker for week 15. Who's on the docket?
Will Lutz. I think he's only rostered in like 13% of Yahoo leagues. Tied for 5th in kicker scoring this year for the surprisingly potent Denver Broncos, and he gets the altitude lift in Denver at home against the Colts this week.
You got to love that when you get the bonuses for the bigger kicks too, because in Denver, that's something that's a little bit more feasible over the years. All right, let's get to the top 5 waiver wire ads of the week. And just a reminder, if you need more help with the waiver wire, make sure you're using the waiver assistant on My Playbook. Download My Playbook. Make sure that you sync your leagues for free. You might have gone the whole season. Everything's been great, but you know what? This is the playoffs. Leave no stone unturned. Use everything you can to make sure you're getting an advantage. Still time to download My Playbook wherever you get your apps. So go to fantasypros.com/myplaybook and use the waiver assistant. And also go to fantasypros.com to see all the waiver rankings, all the waiver wire content, because we're talking championships now, okay? This is not week 6, week 7. We're just kind of running around. No, you need all the information you can to make the best decisions. Fitzy, take me through the top 5 waiver wire ads for week 15, round 1 of the playoffs. What's the top 5 look like?
All right, I've got Tank Bigsby at number 1, just ahead of Sincere McCormick, but I think that's a coin flip close to it. I could make a case for Sincere over Tank for sure. And number 3, a guy we didn't talk about, Jaleel McLaughlin, who I know it's been really unpredictable. Sean Payton has truly been riding the hot hand, but last we saw the Broncos before their week 14 bye, it was Jaleel McLaughlin leading the way with 14 carries for 84 yards, and he gets a pretty good matchup against the Colts in week 15. Quentin Johnston, number 4, Elijah Moore, number 5. And just one more guy I want to mention to keep an eye on, Joe, the alluded to it earlier, and the uncertain status of Isaac Guerrero after his injury. Patrick Taylor is going to be a guy people are going to want to watch, although it's not totally clear. I think Patrick Taylor would be the guy, but the 49ers did just acquire Izzy Abanikanda from the Jets practice squad. So there's a chance Izzy could cut into that workload, but we know Kyle Shanahan kind of likes to ride with one guy, and he's got a little more familiarity with Patrick Taylor, who's been on the roster longer.
Who'd have thought the Madden curse would extend to the entire backfield of the 49ers this year? I mean, what do you think about it, right? You got McCaffrey on the cover, and then at the end, nobody, I don't know, kind of want to stay away from this. At this point, maybe Mr. Abanikanda should rethink this move to San Francisco. I don't know. Just saying, be careful out there. Buddy.
It's like Spinal Tap drummers going down left and right.
That was such a good. Oh my god.
Yeah, good reference. That's nice.
So good. Stonehenge. All right, let's get to D-Bro's top 5 for week 15. D-Bro, what does the list look like?
Sincere McCormick takes the top spot. Elijah Moore, number 2. We talked about Isaiah Davis and the great matchup this week. I don't think Breece Hall is back. So he got the goal line work. Probably going to get it again this week. He's number 3. Tank is number 4, and Patrick Taylor Jr. on the short week. I do think he's going to be the guy for the 49ers because they didn't elevate Izzy last week. Keyshawn Vaughn was the number 2 running back. I think this could be Taylor's backfield on a short week, so he's number 5.
There you have it, everybody. So get out there, start the road to the championship right now. It's fun. This is what we all been working for all these many months, is to get there. Hopefully you have at least one team in the playoffs, if not all of your teams in the playoffs. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel here. Again, Fantasy Pros YouTube. We're huge. We're fun. We have a great time here talking football. We want you to be a part of it. So ring that bell till it goes ding for notifications so you don't miss a piece of content. We've got amazing content going through the playoffs for you. And of course, check out our newest show, Out of Balance, with me and my 2 best friends, Bogman and the Welsh, talking crap on each other, talking football, having some fun, a little betting, a little this, a little that. A little song, a little dance. It's got all of the above in there, so make sure you check that out as well. That'll do it for us. But the story of the game goes on. For Pat Fitzmaurice and Derek Brown, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.